Hello viewers and welcome to another episode of Elections by Numbers. Today we're talking about the Badger State, Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin contains a combined length of rivers and streams of over 26,000 miles, which is enough to span the globe at the equator. Wisconsin also produces more milk than any other state in the country, and 90% of that milk is converted into cheese. The state makes over 600 varieties of cheese in over 100 cheese factories, but you do need a license to be a cheesemaker in Wisconsin, and if you don't like that, vote. I also just recently learned that the state is the birthplace of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was essentially founded in the town of Ripon, Wisconsin in 1854 as a sort of pushback against the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which largely overturned the Missouri Compromise. The party looks much different today than it did back in 1854, but that is where the whole thing started. Wisconsin has 8 congressional House districts, and the current balance of power is 5 Republicans to 3 Democrats. Of all those 8 districts, there are 2 that I would maybe pay a little closer attention to this year. And those are Wisconsin's 1st District and the 3rd District. Wisconsin's 1st in the southeast corner of the state is represented by Republican Brian Steele and has been since 2018 when he won his first term. He replaced retiring former House Speaker Paul Ryan, and the district encompasses the town of Kenosha, which has been in the news a lot lately, and it has a partisan lean of +5 into the Republican column when compared to the national average according to the Cook Political Report's Partisan Voting Index. Wisconsin's 3rd is in the southwestern part of the state and is currently represented by Democrat Ron Kind, who is running for his 13th term this November, and that district has a lean that is even. It is 0, so it represents the national average in terms of partisanship. To learn more about how Wisconsinites have been voting for their representatives, let's pull up a line graph right now. And here we go, competitive as expected. We do see the expected peaks and dips, well, much more dramatically from Democrats than we do from Republicans in the state anyway. And that has largely resulted in Democrats turning out in higher numbers during presidential years and Republicans turning out in higher numbers during midterm years, until we get to this most recent midterm cycle in 2018 when Democrats maintained their edge by just barely dropping off in numbers at all. It's almost imperceptible in this graph, and Republicans dropping off in more noticeable higher amounts of voters. Ultimately, this greater than expected advantage for Democrats in 2018 did not result in any seats flipping in the House, but the trajectory of votes, of how voter turnouts are trending in Wisconsin as of now are largely why I'm even considering Wisconsin's 1st district as one to consider this year. That combined with the fact that it is the district that surrounds Kenosha, which has seen plenty of social unrest in recent times, and I imagine will energize a lot of people to get to the polls this November in that district. Okay, let's toss that graph aside. Considering the partisan leans of the districts and how they voted in 2018, I don't think either district is going to flip this year either. I do believe Wisconsin's 1st will drift further to the left, but that will not be enough for the seat to flip as of now. As I said, Kenosha has seen plenty of its share of social unrest as a result of excessive use of police force. Jacob Blake getting shot in the back several times by police officers while going into his car and causing a lot of anxiety and unrest in the state is I think will push the state further slightly to the left because Democrats have really embraced that reapportioning of funding for police. But again, not enough to flip the seat, but it will get more competitive as we move forward in Wisconsin. So now let's make this result official and put it on our first map right now. Mark it. Now it is time to talk about the presidential election of 2020, starring President Donald Trump and Democratic challenger Joe Biden. Wisconsin is a state that voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago over Hillary Clinton by 0.8%, a 0.8% margin of victory for Donald Trump, making Wisconsin one of the 3 Rust Belt states that just narrowly voted Republican 4 years ago after having voted Democrat for many cycles. Prior to 2016, the state had actually not voted for a Republican since 1984 when they voted for Ronald Reagan. And in fact, the only state that did not vote for Ronald Reagan that year was Minnesota. The state is a major focus of both the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign this year, as its 10 electoral college votes are seen as essential, instrumental to their path to a electoral college victory this year. To gain further insight about how Wisconsinites have been voting for presidents, let's pull up some voter turnout ratios right now. Okay, and looking at these To be perfectly honest, I find these numbers kind of funny. I mean, they're pretty much exactly the same in 2016 as they were in 2012, except in reverse order. In 2012, Barack Obama received 12.18% more votes than all Democratic House candidates running in Wisconsin that year. And Mitt Romney received almost exactly the same amount of votes as all Republicans running for House seats in Wisconsin that year. And then it's completely reversed in 2016, where Hillary Clinton received just about the same amount of votes as all Democratic House candidates running in Wisconsin, and Trump received more votes than all the Republicans running in the House for Wisconsin. If you'll remember from our previous graph, Democrats did have a slight advantage in raw turnout numbers in the state of Wisconsin in 2016, but that was voting for House candidates. Because the enthusiasm was slightly up for Trump here in 2016, more so than it was for Hillary Clinton, that was enough to net him a popular vote win in the state of Wisconsin. A very narrow victory, like I said, 0.8%, which at the end of the day is just as good as winning all the votes in Wisconsin, because in either way, you're still going to get 10 Electoral College votes, and that's exactly what happened. Trump carried Wisconsin the first time a Republican was able to do that in 32 years. The question going forward, of course, is will Trump be able to maintain an advantage like this in voter turnout ratios? Well, let's toss those numbers aside. One factor that can help us determine how that could possibly, an answer to that question, is his approval rating. We do consider the approval rating of the incumbent in our calculations. In this case, it is President Trump. As of this video, he is at minus 10 points in Wisconsin. Specifically, he has the approval of 44% of Wisconsinites and the disapproval of 54%, leaving very little wiggle room for this president, only 2% undecided. And that's the last piece of the puzzle. We can give everything we know now to Pollbot to calculate who we think is going to win the presidential race in Wisconsin for 2020. Pollbot, let's calculate that right now. And there is your answer. We have projected Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, to win the state of Wisconsin this year by about a 7.32% margin of victory. This is a big win for Joe Biden. This is a flip from how the state voted 4 years ago. And not only that, it's a shift to the left of about 8 percentage points, which is significant. The largely energized Democratic base, as evidenced from the raw House turnout numbers we were looking at earlier, combined with Trump's minus 10 approval rating, is largely a factor in the outcome of this prediction. And this is the second flip that we've projected so far in this series, the first being Michigan several weeks ago. So that's great news for Joe Biden moving forward from here. Let's make that result official and put it on our presidential map right now. Mark it. And now all the election results are in for the state of Wisconsin. We've made a major call today in predicting that Joe Biden will carry Wisconsin this year, netting him another 10 Electoral College votes towards his path to a potential victory. Let's talk briefly about the future of Wisconsin by pulling up an old line graph and a new one as well. And first, let's take a bit of a closer look at the raw House turnout number graph we were looking at earlier in the video. Let's look specifically at the slope values that are available in both of those equations that you can see there. That's the value preceding X. For Democrats, it's 79.1, and for Republicans, it's negative 11.8. Basically, what those numbers mean is when you look at the last decade as a whole, on average, every 2 years, Democrats have been adding voters for their candidates by a rate of roughly 79,100 votes every 2 years, and Republicans have been losing votes at a rate of roughly 11,800 votes every 2 years, meaning that Democrats have been behind. Well, they were behind at the beginning, as you can see, but they've been gaining over the course of the last 10 years at a rate of roughly 90,000 votes, and now they are projected to be outpacing Republicans much more comfortably than they ever were 2 years ago or 4 years ago. And bearing in mind that presidential to House voter ratios are roughly around 100% and pretty competitive in Wisconsin, this is certainly not good for Trump moving forward. I feel like it's pretty unlikely that he will carry the state for a second time this year, looking at numbers like these. And looking briefly at this other line graph, these are estimates for the rate of increase or decrease in those presidential to House voter ratios that I was using earlier. This is basically just another way to visualize how much popular Barack Obama was compared to Hillary Clinton, or how much more popular Trump was compared to Mitt Romney. Either way you want to look at it, both of those statements have some truth to them. It's hard to say whether or not Trump will maintain his advantage in those ratios this year. That's what this line graph would suggest. But, I do think his approval rating is also something to consider in the state. That is certainly not going to be helping him moving forward. If Joe Biden is even moderately liked or approved of in Wisconsin, that is big trouble for Trump with considering both of these line graphs together. Okay, now let's toss those line graphs aside, and I will give you my consensus, my final consensus on the state of Wisconsin. I do believe it will become more Republican after this November. Looking back over Wisconsin's voting history, it votes Democrat and moves further to the right, and then votes Democrat again and moves further to the right. And 4 years ago, that was enough for Trump to carry the state, but I would expect the state to take a hard lurch to the left again this year, as we've projected Joe Biden to move the center of the spectrum to the left 8 percentage points. But if we're talking about 2022 and 2024, the state is certainly going to remain competitive. Republicans are going to continue to focus resources on this state moving forward. The population of Wisconsin is not growing at the rate that many other states are, which is something that generally favors Republicans, I believe. So, bottom line, Wisconsin becoming more Republican after this year. And that just about does it for our latest episode of Elections by Numbers. I want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in today. If you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button to get updates on new content as it becomes available. I upload videos every Monday and Thursday. I'm also on Twitter, and I update that account with which state I'm covering next ahead of the scheduled release date. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve, please give me a follow on Twitter, and that link is in the description. Thanks again for watching. Thank you for voting. See you next time.